So let me get started. There is a problem with the way the United States is going. The trajectory right now is very troublesome to me. I can list several problems that we have in different areas. Probably none of these are going to be that surprising to you, but there's sunshine at the end of the presentation, so bear with me. Well, the first thing, in my view, is there's a huge bloated government. It's grown tremendously over time, as you all know, and not always, for the better. So a few things I noticed when I was doing a little research for this presentation was, do you know how many hundreds of individual federal agencies there are? It goes on for pages and pages and pages. And some of those agencies you've never heard of course. And I'm going to guess that some of them don't do things that we care about or want to have done, but it's hard to tell. Another thing that's a problem right now, and it has been a problem for many years, I think, in a lot of different federal agencies, inefficiency and failure are simply rewarded with more money. We'll throw more money after something when it doesn't work. So we'll just, that's how we'll fix it. Another area is accounting standards. I know this sounds kind of boorish, but a business is required to have to keep track of their gross receipts and how they spend their money and so forth using general accounting methods. The federal government has no such rule. So they get money into their budgets, they spend it, and they make sure they spend it all because they don't want their budget to go down the next year. Another area that's a problem, oh, and by the way, there is a budget process that Congress is supposed to follow, and it has been followed occasionally, but not only twice since 2010 have they actually used the budget process. Instead, it's continuing resolutions. Just throw some more money into it and keep going. Make sure the government does shut down. So not exactly efficient. And the result of all this spending, of course, is massive borrowing. Borrowing from our future, from our kids' future and our grandchildren's future. So this little graph here is something you probably are fairly familiar with. This particular one was done by the Federal Reserve, and it shows that our total public debt at the end of 2020 was $27 trillion. Well, since 2020, the recent report says we've gone up another $2 trillion just this year alone. So I ask you, how long can this go on before something really bad happens? Somebody's financing this debt. We're lucky right now that the interest rates are low enough that the economy can handle it, but at some point, something's got to give. This graph shows you public trust in the federal government. And trust in the federal government recently is down in the 20s. And this is done by Pew Research. So they are, in my view, are not, a right-wing organization. They're very likely, these numbers are probably worse right now than they have been in forever. So if it's in 21, it was 24% it shows there. Somebody told me that this same organization said it was down in the teens now. So I don't know, I can't verify that. But anyways, not good. So why is there a lack of trust? Well, I can give you a whole list. I've got slide after slide of things that cause people pause. The very first one on my list is the mismanagement of the COVID pandemic. And of course, COVID is a bad disease, and we wanted to control it. And I'll give them credit; they didn't know what they were dealing with in the beginning. But my gosh, I don't think anybody is going to be giving anyone any rewards for how this was handled when it's all over. Another one on my list is the incompetent and humiliating withdrawal from Afghanistan. I don't know how you feel about it, but I felt terrible, you know, when those young people were killed in the last day as we're, you know, being thrown out like a bunch of, you know, cowards out of Afghanistan. I just couldn't stand it. So anyway, another one, suspicion that the last election was stolen. Well, I don't know. The problem is we don't have any confidence in it. You know, maybe perfectly pure snow, but the lack of curiosity on both sides of the aisle about how the election went last time, to me, was very troubling. I keep going through the list here. I've got 2 or 3 slides of these things. Unelected bureaucrats put in charge of things decided by, should be decided by the people or the states. I mean, we've all heard the stories of, you know, some poor rancher somewhere who's got a mud puddle out there that the feds are trying to regulate as navigable waters, things like that. It's crazy. No one likes the lockdowns and mandates that have been foisted upon us in the last few years. Well, last 2 years, I guess I should say. It could be worse. You know, it could be like Australia, where a friend of mine told me her mother had to use a QR code on her phone to get into the grocery store, you know, to prove that she was, you know, vaccinated, that sort of thing. So anyway, I'm not going to go any more on this slide. I'll get some more. I question whether the bulk of politicians really have the best interests in mind, at least the politicians in DC, let's just put it that way, have the best interests of the people in mind. There's so much anecdotal evidence of corruption in DC that is just, well, I just can't stand it. I heard Tulsi Gabbard, who's a Democrat, say that when she got to DC, that her first week there, they told her, this is how it's going to be. You know, we give you the list of bills that you're going to vote for, and you have to vote for them. And she said, but I've got my own bills. Well, her bills won't be considered unless she votes for the other bills first. So, and I'm not blaming the Democrats for this one. I think this is probably true on both sides of the aisle. So this is a nonpartisan kind of issue here. The other thing about you know, the political climate right now is that politicians seem to be making it a lifelong career choice rather than you know what the founders envisioned, which was citizen politicians who went to Washington and served and then came home. Well, as you can tell, you know, 95% of senators always get reelected. So we end up with folks that are there 20, 30, 40 years. And of course, they're beholden to people for the money that it takes to get reelected. So it's messy. In my view, we could probably do better if we had term limits. And you'll hear more about that later. But the other thing that is going on, you see it in the news all the time, or at least some of the news, depends on where you're looking. There seems to be 2 sets of justice systems for us right now. We've got the people that are well connected in DC that are held to one standard, and the rest of us are held to another standard. And guess which one is tougher on you if you violate something. But it gets worse. The federal government is broken, but so is the culture of the country. For decades, we've been sliding further and further away from what the founders envisioned for our country in terms of culture. You know, the country was founded on Judeo-Christian values, which are, regardless of what religion you believe in, are kindness to each other and looking out for each other and things like that, not looking for the government to take care of you. They're supposed to be self-sufficient citizens going about your business. We're so far away from that in some areas of the country that it's just really sad. Another thing that's sort of been creeping in lately, and that is the woke culture. The woke culture has come in. It's done all sorts of things. Changed the language. Changed how many genders there are. You can go on down the list. But in the name of diversity and inclusion, we see the exact opposite. I mean, it's basically you have to watch what you say. If you say the wrong thing, you lose your career or your job at least. If you have skin that's not the right color, that can be held against you. Martin Luther King, I think, would be horrified at what some aspects of our culture are today. Another thing that seems to be a bad trend is parents are starting to complain more and more about the fact that they have less and less to say about how their kids are taught in the schools. Most people don't want critical race theory taught, so we're headed that way in a lot of places. Some places that have put their feet down and said no, there will be no critical race theory taught in our schools, but you have to wonder. The culture isn't really going to cooperate with that. I suspect it's still being taught, behind your back, at least in some schools. Another thing that bothers me personally is that in the name of science, we're doing all kinds of things that have nothing to do with science. It's all about politics and very little to do about science. And you can come up with the list yourself. I'm sure you have your opinions on this, but for me, the masks are one thing. Mr. Fauci or Dr. Fauci, whatever his name is, he's flip-flopped on masks so many times, makes your head spin. So are masks effective or are masks not effective? It kind of depends on the day of the week and who you talk to. Same thing with the vaccine. I mean, I think the vaccine has served a purpose, but is it so great that you should take away people's rights to say, no, I don't want it? And I think the answer for me is no, I'm not doing it. And data is starting to emerge showing the vaccine is damaging the very people it's supposed to protect. And along with it, the masks. What are masks doing to children? A mask on a very young child robs them of the opportunity to see the facial expressions of their teachers and their other students. And I think the long-term effects of that are going to be not good, my opinion. So is our democracy failing us? That's the question that I hear. And what I would refer people to is the fact that, and many younger generation don't know what form of government we really have. We don't really have a democracy. In the next slide, I'm going to show you what the difference is between a democracy and what we have today.
The close of the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia in 1787, legend has it that a woman called out to Benjamin Franklin to ask what kind of government the delegates had created. Franklin responded, "A republic, madam, if you can keep it." A republic? Shouldn't Franklin have said, a democracy? Isn't that what we have in the United States? Most people today would say yes. After all, if our country isn't a democracy, what is it? It's not a dictatorship, the rule of one man, or an oligarchy ruled by a small group. In America, the people are in charge. That's literally what democracy means in the original Greek. Demos, kratos. The people, demos, rule, kratos. But let's pause for a moment and consider more deeply what the word means in practice and why the delegates in Philadelphia rejected it. That's right, rejected it. Our government was established by a national charter, the Constitution of the United States. We are governed by the institutions and according to the rules and principles created and adopted when our forebears ratified that document, making it the supreme law of the land. Are those institutions, properly speaking, democratic? The men who bequeathed our form of government to us, those we call our founding fathers, didn't see it that way. They understood the institutions established by the Constitution to be republican. In fact, though the founders believed in government of the people, by the people, for the people, as Abraham Lincoln put it in the Gettysburg Address, they did not believe in pure or unrestricted democracy. They feared that democracy, strictly speaking, contained within it the impulse to mob rule, the stifling of civil liberty, the trampling by majorities of the rights of minorities. To put it more bluntly, pure democracy frightened them. So while they built into the Constitution significant democratic elements, they also built in non-democratic features to protect liberty and prevent tyranny. It wasn't simply that they favored representative government over direct democracy, though they did. It's that they rejected the idea that the majority wins was by definition the just outcome. Indeed, in what is perhaps the most famous of the 85 Federalist Papers, Federalist 10, James Madison, precisely in distinguishing a democracy, which he did not favor, from a republic, which he did, noted that a crucial advantage of republicanism is to refine the public views by passing them through the medium of a chosen body of citizens whose wisdom may best discern the true interests of the country. And so we have representative government, and more than that, we have a bicameral, that is, two-tiered legislature, a Congress with a highly democratic House of Representatives and a not very democratic Senate. Therefore, California, with its massive population, has 52 representatives in the House. Wyoming has 1. Yet Wyoming has 2 senators, the same number as California and every other state. A pure Democrat would say that's unfair. Each Wyoming resident has far more power than every Californian. But a Republican would say, well, we aren't and shouldn't be a pure democracy. If we were, large population states like California would overwhelm the needs and interests of small population states like Wyoming. That's why we're called the United States of America. Each state has its own separate identity, holds its own separate elections. Just as we don't want one person or small group of people to dominate our government, we don't want one state or a few states to dominate our government. A republic is a way of diffusing power, and a brilliant one at that. We see something similar in the Constitution's procedures for choosing a president. An obvious possibility would have been by a national popular vote. The founders wisely decided against this option. Rather, they created an electoral college to protect the interests of the less populous states. Even today, their decision makes sense. As my Princeton colleague, Professor Alan Gelzo, observes, a direct national popular vote would incentivize campaigns to focus almost exclusively on densely populated urban areas. The electoral college system incentivizes candidates to court voters more broadly, making presidential elections more fully national. So if we understand the system of government our founders bequeathed to us, we will see why they preferred to describe it as a republic rather than a democracy. Of course, it has strong democratic elements, but America was not created to be a pure democracy, for very good reasons. Those reasons remain as valid today as they were in 1789. We should not go along with those who today are demanding constitutional changes simply because this or that institution or procedure established by the Constitution, say the Senate or the Electoral College, is not democratic. More democratic doesn't necessarily mean better. It doesn't necessarily mean more just. Our founders understood this. So should we. We have a republic, and we should keep it. I'm Robert George, McCormick Professor of Jurisprudence and Director of the James Madison Program at Princeton University, for Prager University.
This video was made possible by a generous donation from the William S. Knight Foundation.
Thank you for watching this video. To keep PragerU videos free, please consider making a tax-deductible donation.
Next video is to talk about Article 5, which gives citizens the right to come up with amendments to the Constitution. Article 5 provides 2 ways to do it, actually. One is through the Congress, and one is through the individual states. So fat chance getting anything through Congress because they're the ones that like things the way it is. So what Article 5 gives us the opportunity is if 2/3 of the states agree on a particular call for a convention of states, then a convention of states is called. And it's called to consider the very specific areas in the call, which in the case of Convention of States, the organization, we have three things that we're trying to do. One is term limits, one is government overreach, and one is fiscal responsibility. So anything that comes up that's outside the scope of those three areas would be automatically rejected. But anything that fits in those three areas could be potentially used as a suggestion or a suggested amendment to the Constitution, which would then go out for ratification. And if it was ratified by 34 states, or excuse me, 37 states, three quarters, I think it's 37, then it would actually become part of the Constitution. So this video I've got here gives you an idea what the founders were thinking about, or the framers of the Constitution were thinking about when they put Article 5 in there. So let me play this.
Imagine you were in this room. We're in Independence Hall in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, the very place where the Constitution was done and the Declaration of Independence. I'm Rick Green, America's Constitution coach, here with Mark Meckler. And Mark, if you had been in this room when it happened, when the Constitution was created, and George Mason stands up at the very end to say, hey guys, wait a minute, we messed up, we got a real problem here, what would you do?
I'd probably get irritated. Sit down, let's go home. It's 2 days, September 15th, 1787, 2 days before the end of convention. You guys have heard the story. It's hot in here. Like, they didn't have HVAC back then, so it's hot. The windows are boarded up. They're all irritated by now. They want to go home. Mason stands to address the men, and he says, we have a terrible problem in the document drafted.
I can hear the drums.
Yeah, everybody's like, oh, George again. Right? And he says, we've given the power to the federal government to propose amendments should they deem them necessary, but we've not given the same power to the people acting through the state.
Now I gotta stop you there, back up. They've been here for all those weeks to create a federal government. They've redesigned the whole thing. The Constitution is designed, here's our three branches of government, here's what states can do, here's what federal government can do. They created all of that, and he said, wait a minute, we have a problem.
Yeah, there's a little bit of lost history in there. Actually, the very first draft that went out to the working committees contained this power. The states had the power.
I didn't know
The
that.
federal government didn't, actually. And when it came back, somehow it had been reversed. And so he notices this at the last minute, literally, brings this problem up. Everybody groans. We think we don't have to videotape, right? But then he asks a question that I think is the real question, and this question resonates across the ages. He says, are we so naive that we believe that a federal government becomes a tyranny will ever propose amendments to restrain its own tyranny?
Now wait, let me put that in country boy language. I'm a country boy. That means if the federal government ever gets out of control, do we really think the very people that stole power, that took it without permission, will just give it back? We'll just hand it off to them?
You know, whenever I tell this story in a hall or in a meeting somewhere, people
Yeah.
and I think that's probably what they did. You know, we don't have a recording. You can kind of tell. Madison's notes, in that point, they say nin com. It's Latin for no comment, essentially. That's an abbreviation. No debate. These guys debated everything.
That's the 1787 version of mic drop.
Exactly. I call it the forehead slap. Like, everybody just went, oh my gosh,
We missed that.
I can't believe we missed that. And so Eldridge Gary proposes the second part of Article 5, gives the states 2/3 of the power to call and convene a convention of states for proposing amendments. Then the vote's taken. I think this part's incredible. Imagine them in this room, right? Ready to go home. It's unanimous. Absolutely. So it was so obvious to them that we had to give this power to the people acting through the states, that there's no debate, and it's unanimously.
Now let's just summarize that real quick. So they created the Constitution, they created the three branches of government, they created all these different levels of accountability, and they said, we didn't solve everything. In the future there will be issues, this will need to be amended. Congress can propose amendments and send it back to the states, and they ratify it. And what George Mason changed, what they actually put in there at the end is, the states can propose amendments. amendments. The states come together and propose amendments, and then it goes back to all the states to be ratified. And unanimously, they said, that's a good idea, we need that second mechanism.
Yeah, important to remember what that means is they gave the ultimate power not to the federal government, not to Washington DC, but to the people in the states.
Thank you, George Mesa.
So here it is. Article 5 is really simple language. It can be read by anybody. It's less than a page. And the stuff I've got, sorry. Here we have Article 5, a page of text, pretty simple, straightforward English for the average person. Doesn't take a PhD to read it, or a lawyer. Basically says here that, if the legislatures of 2/3 of the states come up with identical calls for a convention, and that's what we're proposing, is getting that many states to call a convention. And then that convention will come, out of that will potentially come 1, 2, 3, you put the number there, of individual amendments that will go out for ratification to the states. And if it's ratified by 3/4 of the states, then that becomes part of the Constitution. So the balanced budget amendment would be one that would fit in this framework, for example, if you wanted that. So this brings me to the Convention of States mission. So our mission as Convention of States is to build a grassroots army. And we've been working at this for several years. We've got 17 states. That's right, 2 more were just added to the list in the last couple of weeks. We have 17 states going in that direction. But as I mentioned before, the calls are for fiscal responsibility, stopping government overreach, and term limits. So it's got to fit in those 3. And if it does, then it'll be considered as a possible amendment and sent out for consideration by the states. So our primary mission, therefore, is to build an engaged army of self-governing grassroots activists. You say, well, what does that have to do with calling a convention? I thought you were trying to call a convention. Well, we are trying to call a convention. A convention is a very necessary part of getting the amendments passed. But it's only part of the whole picture. I mentioned before, we've got cultural problems. We've got all kinds of stuff going on in our country where we need the individuals to stand up, get off the sofa, get involved every day to do something about this. The opposition has had, years and years, decades actually, working against this sort of thing. As you know. So anyway, that is our primary mission, is growing the grassroots army. And you might say, well, okay, so what is Arizona doing? Well, Arizona years ago passed the resolution. We are what we call a passed state. So we passed the resolution. And you'd say from that, okay, well then why is Dwayne standing up there in front of a crowd talking about all this stuff? Aren't we done? And the answer to that is no. We have to every day make sure that our local politicians and our state politicians are working in our best interest. That means that each one of you needs to think about how can you help to make sure that our representatives are doing doing the people's business instead of whatever they do. Well, it means going to the school boards. It means maybe even, saying, gosh, I'm going to run for the school board. That sort of thing. So we are asking everybody to join us in this grassroots army and make sure that we're working along this path to restoring the founders' original intent for the country. So I covered some of the progress already. We have 17 states. Arizona's passed the resolution. And Wisconsin and Nebraska were the last 2. We have some others in the hopper. They're partially through the legislative process. In many cases, we've got 2 or 3 that Potentially we'll get there this legislative season, we'll see. But this is an ongoing effort for us at Convention of States, because imagine we're a past state, we've made sure that we can call the convention, but we know that at some point the opposition is going to try to take that away. I mean, that's the way politics works, right? If somebody presents a new bill that tries to take it away from us, then we'll have a struggle all over again if we were to let them get it done. So we don't want to do that. That's why it's so important for the Convention of States to stay, out in front, leading the charge to make sure that this stays on the people's mind, and we continue to make sure it's working. So here's a map of the states that have passed it. So in conclusion, I told you before, I think the federal government is essentially broken. It's dysfunctional. Many of the individual parts of the government are not working in the people's interest anymore. And as I mentioned before, we have two levels of justice system for those that are connected and those who are not connected. And the framers of the Constitution, in their genius, created Article 5 that allows us to do something about government out of control. And it can be done legally and peacefully. So the path from where we are to submitting the constitutional amendments is, as I said, it's not an easy one. You can imagine, all it takes is somebody in one committee in some of these states to say no, and it doesn't go. So the way that you get through legislation through, whether it be this or some bill that you want, you've got to bring pressure on the politicians. They respond to the people in their districts. If you call them, if you visit them, if you send them letters, they care. I mean, sometimes you wonder, but I also see it from their position as well, because they are being pulled left and right, up and down, all over the place, and they are, of course, people just like we are. And the legislators in Arizona are not doing this for money. $30,000 a year, is that what they make, Donna? Something like that? Yeah, not even that, she says. So these are average people. You can talk to them. You can get in to talk to them. You can. They respond to handwritten letters, especially because it's hard to ignore a piece of paper on your desk. Emails are okay, but you know what we all do with our email, right? Anyway, we invite you to be part of this movement. We ask you to do something little at first, which is just sign the senior moment, excuse me. Sign the petition, please. That's all I'm asking. Anyway, and it's important because we have 60,000 petition signers in Arizona. It sounds like a big number, but the bigger the number is, the more the politicians pay attention to us. And if we say we're going to help you push through some legislation because it fits with the Convention of States mission, then it's a powerful thing. And the more people we can show them that have signed up for this, better chance we have of having it happen and for them to support us in our mission. So, just in closing, let me say, electing like-minded people to all these offices in DC and the state and even local is a good part of what we need to do. I don't discourage that at all, but it's not the main problem. We don't have a staffing problem, if you like. What we have really is the functional organization or the culture of around that is what we're trying to change. The example I gave was term limits, because if the politicians go to DC and they know that they're only going to be there for 6 years, say, they are going to be much less likely to be sucked into the, pay-for-play games that some of them get stuck in DC. So anyway, I could keep going. We the people decide. The Constitution says that the power is given to the people and the states. The enumerated powers that are given to the federal government are fine. They are given to the federal government. Everything else is given to the states and the people. So take up the challenge to make your legislators do their responsibility and make sure that they take back from the federal government things that the federal government shouldn't be doing.